Welcome everyone to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Tuesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in today. It's been a minute since we've been able to chat with y'all, but thank you so much for hanging out today. This week, much like the last, we're just going to be all over the place. I'm going to be on Sports 960 The Fan Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Then I'm off in the mountains on Friday, Saturday, and coming back on Sunday. And then a Grey Cup party on Sunday. And then I'm back on 960 on Monday. But then the Tuesday, it'll be back to normal until the weekend, and then it's my birthday. My family is here, so the close of 2024 is going to be a little bit all over the place, but doesn't mean it's not going to be fun. Coming up on the show today, we get ready for the 2024 Grey Cup. We continue to roll through the NFL season, NFL recap, fantasy football stuff, waiver wire, dumpster darlings, all of that. Then we get into some Major League Baseball predictions as the off season is here, and we will close with a look at the Ultimate Fighting Championship, getting ready for UFC 309. So lots to get to. Let's get to it and start talking Canadian football. The Canadian Football League is now down to 2 as the Toronto Argonauts and Winnipeg Blue Bombers will meet in this year's Grey Cup. Let's talk about how we got here. Let's start with the Argonauts. The big story from this game, obviously, is that they advance, but they lose Chad Kelly as he goes down with a broken leg. And that one, it's difficult, right? Running for it on second and long, defender, Adiemi Berglund, falls on his leg. It kind of goes, and he immediately knows, and apparently so does everybody else, because Kelly, with the mics that they just had on everyone, pick up someone here and go like, oh, he broke his leg. Yeah, that's a broken leg. Yeah, it's broken. Quick diagnosis on a football field. Also, for those of you watching, yes, no, bit of color on those. My niece wanted salon day yesterday, and also was insistent that I go, and then pick the color. So, branding, right? Matches the color behind me. But anyway, for those of you listening, I have shiny baby blue nail paint, or fingernail paint, polish, whatever. Not the point. Football. Sports, men. It's a tough situation for the Argos. Obviously, look, I have been fairly vocal about things with Chad Kelly. There are going to be no tears shed here, but I do feel genuinely terrible for his teammates, who a lot of them are going into, if not one of then the biggest game of their careers, and now they're doing so without their starting quarterback. The one thing that I think the Argos can latch onto this week is that they won that football game, a lot of it kind of without Chad Kelly. But before they make that big touchdown drive at the end of the first half, Kelly had 23 yards passing, and they still finished that half up 21-17. Their defense gave up a ton of yards, but they were still able to force some turnovers in huge moments in that football game. And then Janarian Grant busts one off for a touchdown in special teams. Also, there is a pick six that lets them have the lead. Yes, obviously, their chances go down significantly without Chad Kelly there. Arbuckle clearly wasn't it in the middle of the season, and I can't imagine a week's worth of practices in November are going to be enough to get him to that point. So, what do you do, right? They're going to have to get creative. That is the only thing that really can come out of this, is that Janarian Grant's involvement, I think, needs to be expanded on. I think a lot is going to be relied upon Kadeem Carey, and then you have a talented receiving core that is going to have to step up. Polk, Daniels, all of them are going to have to play, Coxie as well, going to all have to play the biggest games of their lives this week if they are going to come away from the 111th Grey Cup with a championship victory. Also, and this is a weird thing to say given some of the stuff we just mentioned, the defense needs to be better. It is tough to say that with the defense that forced that many turnovers, but they gave up way too many yards in this game. And look at what happened to Saskatchewan, and we'll get to that in a second. Look what happened to Saskatchewan against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It was a turnover-based approach, and Winnipeg just picked them apart. The defense did put a little bit of pressure on Cody Fajardo, but still, the underneath passes were there all of the time, and they were able to kind of moved the ball a little bit efficiently. It was just that they turned it over at really, really bad times that ended up costing Montreal. And now, again, that is part of the point of a bend but don't break defense, is that you are forcing a team to be perfect for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 plays. And Montreal wasn't, very clearly, in this game. But I just feel like if that same defense goes out there against Winnipeg, they're kind of going to get killed. And that's obviously not what they want coming up here in the Grey Cup. On the Montreal side, it's very easy to say it, but they fumbled away an opportunity. The turnover's killing them in this game. 4 fumbles in scoring territory, and then a pick 6. Like, that's your ball game. You end up losing this one by a couple. That's all of that right there. If one of those doesn't happen, they win this game. And honestly, if one of those doesn't happen, it shifts the entire momentum of that game. That one fumble where they get the interception and they're bringing it back, and it is a fumble and down they go, and the Argos recover it. If they don't do that, think of how quickly that shifts in Chad Kelly's mind about how he has just came off of this East Final last year where he threw a bajillion and 1 picks, and it ended up costing them a chance to go to the Grey Cup, and now it's happening again in this game, and it's early. But for them to get that ball back just kind of lets him have a moment in there, and that I think really did allow them to kind of get settled back into this game. You also see in this game why Cody Fajardo can be so frustrating. On one play, the pick 6, that, again, is a big shift in how this game went, you see his feet are set for exactly 0 seconds. He is bouncing around all over the place. And that chaotic energy can, when it works, it's uplifting and it's inspiring. But when it doesn't, goddamn does it look bad. And he's bouncing around and he's ready and we're gonna go. And then he's not set, he has to panic. Shot put, it was actually a pass, but he throws the ball to the running back. Fletcher probably should have that one, but it is a little bit out in front. It gets tipped a couple times, picked, it's going back that way. It's a touchdown. Fajardo in that play looked like the video editing trick where you have one thing that's going at like 3x speed and everything else is moving around in slow motion. But it was all at the same regular speed. Like, it was chaotic. And then it's an interception. And then later, there's pressure coming. He is able to roll out and on the move, put a dot right to his receiver for a touchdown. Like, just one of the prettiest plays you saw all weekend. And he's just able to nail it. And it's like, how are you that, like, what? What happened there? How are you that composed there and not on some of those other plays? How are you both the same human being? It is unbelievable. Like you see the tantalizing plays that make him a Grey Cup MVP while also seeing the plays that had fans in Saskatchewan ready to drive him to the airport when he became a free agent. So there's a lot of talk now already about the quarterback situation out in Montreal. If Philpott doesn't get hurt, I genuinely think that this team turns out very differently this season. But it is now a very tricky question because Alexander looked ready and you were coming off of a game that felt very winnable and you lost in part because Fajardo didn't make the plays that you needed him to. But he was also at the helm when this team looked unstoppable in the first half of the season. So it is going to be a very, very interesting offseason out in Montreal. Shifting gears now to the West, where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are in a familiar spot off to the Grey Cup again. That was about as complete a performance as you will see from a team in the Canadian Football League. Collaros was slinging it. The receivers were making plays. Oliveira was a bowling ball. The defensive line was getting in Harris's face all game, and when he had time to throw, the DBs were locked on their receivers. But the real stars of this game, I thought, were the Winnipeg offensive linemen. They were brilliant. No offensive line in the league has done that to Saskatchewan this season at all. They just bullied them the entire game. Run game, pass game, didn't matter. Oliveira had a ton of holes and Collaros had a ton of time. It was, they picked Saskatchewan apart. That whole game, they picked Saskatchewan apart because of how well that offensive line played. If they play like that again in the Grey Cup, it doesn't matter who comes in to play quarterback for the Argos. You ain't beating them because Winnipeg can score on every possession if that offensive line is putting up that sort of a performance. Just unbelievable stuff. And then defensively, that secondary was incredible. Holm was unbelievable. The whole secondary, like Ford came up with a big play as well. Bonds got beat deep on one. That should have been a touchdown, but Harris just a touch off, and we'll get to that in a second. But in the CFL, when you have such a big field to cover, it is really difficult to lock a team down the way they did. They completely toyed with Saskatchewan. Harris was off all game, and the defense, I think, was a very big reason for it. Like I said, if they play even remotely close to that style of football again, then we're a lot of people are going to be tuning out after the Jonas Brothers concert, because that game's going to be over quick. So it's going to be a really interesting Grey Cup now. On to the Saskatchewan Roughriders side of things. Quite simply, they just weren't good enough. They were outplayed in every aspect of the sport. It was a bad day to have a bad day for Trevor Harris. He was not close to being as dialed in as he was against the BC Lions. And the pressure in his face had a lot to do with it. And then, like I just said, when he did have time, his receivers were kind of blanketed. But even still, there were a few uncharacteristic misses from Trevor Harris on a pass over the middle a couple of times where it is just behind the receiver. And now part of that is the pressure that is coming at him. Another part of it was how good that coverage was, and the linebackers kind of just getting in the way. And so Harris is processing three different things at once, and he's trying to get the ball down the field, and the throw ends up just being a little bit off. But that wasn't happening last week against BC, and honestly wasn't happening in the 4 games or 5 games leading up to this either, when you saw Trevor Harris absolutely dialed in. Another thing, though, that didn't help was the play calling again, and it was the thing that we talked about throughout this entire season, Saskatchewan's desire to run the ball on first down, and then now Harris can just get whatever he gets on second down and we'll be fine. Winnipeg read that one perfectly. They bottled up Ouellette basically from the second quarter on, and certainly in the second half when the Riders were still insistent on running the football there. There are so many times where you will hear announcers say, well, there's still a lot of time left, so you don't really want to abandon the run. I can assure you Saskatchewan should have wanted to abandon the run because it wasn't working. They, as well as Winnipeg's offensive line was playing, that defensive line stepped up as well and came up with a few very big plays in that run game, forcing Harris into obvious passing situations. And when you have an obvious passing situation, Willie Jefferson is out there with his ears pinned back, Lord help you. It doesn't go well. So this is... It was just all of it combined for a very difficult day for Trevor Harris. And then this defense got beat up. This was tough. This was a really, really tough one. The offensive line just dummied them all game. They had no answer for Oliveira. Even when Edmonton ran all over them at earlier on in the season, kind of around the midway point, it was still like they were focused on Trey Ford and didn't really know how to balance that. It wasn't really Edmonton's offensive line dominated them. It was more a schematic thing. This one was just our big boys out big boyed your big boys, and oh boy, was it a big problem. That's what Winnipeg did to Saskatchewan this entire game. And then, along with that, I thought Saskatchewan's coverage in the secondary was quite soft. A lot of big completions underneath that turned into bigger gains, and first downs, and thusly led to 2 touchdowns. And then a couple of breakdowns. Henderson, I don't want to do the classic Saskatchewan thing and all of that, but might need to replace that one next year. Because that was just, he got whooped on in that game by Lawler a few times. And now Lawler does that to a lot of corners in this league, but hot damn, that was rough. But I think this whole game was summed up in the sequence at the end of the first half. Saskatchewan takes a penalty, the 3-minute warning, then Saskatchewan takes a procedure penalty. It's 2nd and 12, pass underneath to Schaefer Baker is complete, but it only gets them about 10. So you have 2nd and long because kind of your own doing. It was 2nd and 7 anyway. But you have 2nd and long because of your own doing. Harris doesn't really have the time to be able to push the ball down the field the way that they would want to. And so you end up with a pass short of the sticks. And then Winnipeg's defense is right on your receiver. So they are able to make a tackle and stop it short. And then Corey Mace on 3rd and 2 with about a minute to go kicks a field goal that makes it 21-9, which if you are doing the math, turns it from a 2-possession game into a 2-possession game. So it doesn't help at all. Winnipeg gets the ball, and then they convert on 2nd and 10, 2nd and 4, 2nd and 10, and then they get close enough on 2nd and 10 that they can convert it on 3rd and inches for no good goddamn reason because they just kicked the field goal at the buzzer anyway. But either way, that erases that field goal there. And now a 6 and honestly even 10-point swing, if you want to say Saskatchewan's going to march down and score a touchdown there and thusly take a field goal off the board for Winnipeg, that doesn't change this game entirely, right? Like momentum-wise, maybe it does, but it is an excellent sign for what went wrong out in Saskatchewan, and now a lot of questions being asked with the Riders. Overall for Saskatchewan, obviously you can see the Lucha mask behind me. This is obviously the team that I hold dearest to me in the Canadian Football League. This was the most fun Rider season in a very long time. I truly think that Corey Mace has this team going in the right direction. And as I've said a number of different times, I think Corey Mace is on his way to reestablishing what it means to be a Saskatchewan Roughrider. And for a long time, there was no identity to this team. And it was just a bunch of dudes who happened to be playing in Regina. But I think that connection with the fan base is back. And I think that identity with this team is back, and that is going to help. And this team got a lot closer to the Grey Cup than a lot of people would have thought they would at the beginning of the year. That doesn't mean there isn't a long way to go, though. They were so clearly the second best team in that game. And there's questions about Trevor Harris. I thought he was phenomenal when healthy this season, but he's also 38. And so what do you do at the quarterback spot? And there are a lot of in-game decisions that I think Corey Mace is going to have to be a little bit better at as well, which is fine to say about a first-year coach. So overall, it doesn't feel like it right now, but a gigantic success of a season for the Saskatchewan Roughriders and a desperately needed turnaround for a franchise that kind of had nothing going for them for a long time. So overall, thumbs up on the season for the Riders, but when you get that close to the Grey Cup, it's tough to feel super optimistic about things when you just get curb stomped for 60 minutes in a football game. So that's what happened in 3-down football. Let's do a quick rapid fire run through what happened in the National Football League this week. Not going to go super in depth on a lot of these, but just kind of bouncing around the NFL here, and kind of going in chronological order, actually. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that team does not feel like a 4-6 team. There are times that defense feels like the defense of a 4-6 team, but with what Baker Mayfield is doing, this feels like a better team than what is going on out there right now. And when you look at what they could possibly have the rest of the way, it's not insurmountable, I think, for them by any stretch of the imagination here. Just pulling up their schedule real quick. Up next, they have a bye. Then it is at Giants, at Panthers, home Raiders, at Chargers, at Cowboys, home Panthers, home Saints. That home Saints at the end of the year is going to be really interesting, I think, although I don't think they're going to have a lot to play for. You go in there, that is a very easy schedule to run the table with, which would be 7 wins, which would put them at 11-6, and holy hell, you're certainly making the playoffs at 11-6. But like in there's maybe a banana peel, like maybe one of those road games at Chargers, at Cowboys could be the banana peel that you slip on. Although with the Cowboys, that one's becoming increasingly unlikely. So probably the Chargers one then. But aside from that, all of that feels winnable. So if this team can go out there and just win the games they are supposed to, then they should be in a pretty good spot here down the stretch. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are not a team that we are going to be quitting on by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, if we can just pull up a futures here, do we have team playoffs? Where are we at? Tampa Bay Buccaneers, yes, to make the playoffs is at plus 275. That feels pretty good right now. I'm just going to put that out there. That feels like something that might get a little bit of a click at some point. Also, Baker Mayfield is making a whole lot of quarterbacks a whole lot of money now, because there's going to be a lot of, oh, well, Baker figured it out. This guy can too. It's awesome to see Baker bounce back in this way and really show what he has in this kind of second chapter of his career. I don't know what it is going to lead to with Tampa Bay. I don't think this is, well, quarterback of the future, locked in. But you got this guy for a few years, and I think it's going to be pretty good out in Tampa Bay. Sticking in that division, apparently, the Falcons. That's a really bad loss. And I get, like, their kicker missed a bunch of field goals. Maybe we should ask why we needed a bunch of field goals when we're facing New Orleans. And yes, new coach, new energy, all of that. It was Derek Carr throwing to nobody. The most talented guy New Orleans had out on that field dropped a 61-yard touchdown pass, basically. Like, they're New Orleans is not a team you should be having that kind of trouble with. I don't care what new coach bounce there may be. So this is just another nice little reminder that the Atlanta Falcons aren't as good as that record may indicate. Like, you could flip their record with the Bucs, and I would believe it wholeheartedly, having watched this entire season. The Kansas City Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs are just wizards at this point. So many red flags to not take this seriously, but it keeps working. This defense is incredible again. The offense continues to have some issues. I'm going to have a real difficult time with this team. Playoff time. I'll be honest. Like, they're obviously making it. As we go along through the season, it feels like an obvious fade. Like, yeah, they're just not covering every week. But when you get to the playoffs, it's like, man, how do you pick against these guys? This week against the Bills, who are coming off that win over the Colts, is going to be a very, very interesting test for this Chiefs team. Also, I have been hesitant to say this. Pittsburgh Steelers are for real. Russell Wilson, it was fun making fun of him for a couple of years, and all of that, but that was pretty good. Those were some pretty good throws that he was making and some pretty good plays. It wasn't winning a Super Bowl, Russell Wilson, but hot damn, was it a whole lot better than Broncos Nation, let's ride, or whatever the hell he said. That this was a different guy than that last couple of years in Denver, and this defense is so good. They are legitimately a problem. One team I think we have to stop taking seriously is the Minnesota Vikings. Brian Flores can coach the hell out of a defense, but Sam Darnold is turning into a pumpkin, and I do not mean even just like a nice big pumpkin. I am talking about you went away for vacation and forgot the jack-o'-lantern out on your porch, and now it has frosted 5 times since then, and this thing is molding and falling apart and is in 8 different pieces when you come back. That is Sam Darnold right now. This has gotten ugly very quick. If Indianapolis's defense adjusted anything ever, they probably beat the Vikings last week. And now this one, if Jacksonville was even just a smidge resembling a competent football team, they probably win this game as well. So noted that we are going to start fading the Minnesota Vikings, I think, pretty hard here. Same thing goes with the Bears. They're a disaster. They're making some changes in the offensive game plan, firing Shane Waldron. I guess, like, sure, fine. You need a better offensive line. I think that part is glaringly obvious. But yeah, play calling hasn't been helping, so maybe we'll see that. But I think the head coach has kind of lost the room, so to speak, as well. The Jets continue to fall apart. It's wild how they gave up 31 points to Arizona, and even weeks after he was fired, it's still somehow Robert Saleh's fault. Sarcasm, obviously. Aaron Rodgers looks bad. This defense got picked apart. They couldn't do a damn thing on either side of the football, and they just got it handed to them by an Arizona team that is just kind of Cowboys are a joke franchise. It is wild to me that a $10 billion organization is having part of their issues because of sunlight in a multi-billion-dollar arena that they built. Like, could you imagine any other Fortune 500 company, whatever? Like, well, you know, the iPhone, yeah, it's most of the way there, man. Like, the camera's really nice. This new mirroring feature with MacBooks and iMacs, it's pretty sweet. One slight problem: you can't use the space bar or any emojis because the internet doesn't super connect. And the reason for that is that the day they were implementing those, the sun was kind of coming in and hitting the developer in the eye, and they couldn't fix it. And it's like, yeah, you could put in a curtain, but like, what, you're just going to tear down the whole facility? Like, what are you going to do? We would... massive sell-off. All of a sudden, Android phones become the number one thing in the world. Like, just mass chaos everywhere. But because, for some reason, football teams don't need to be run like actual real-life things, we can have an 82-year-old billionaire up there yelling at people who are saying, hey, those curtains you put up for WrestleMania, you think you could put them up there for your football team? It would be comical. I mean, no, it's still comical if it in reality. I was going to say it would be comical if it wasn't true. It's very true, and it's really funny. More sad, I guess, than anything if you're a Cowboys fan. The primetime games, that's a sneaky tough loss for the Texans there. They had Detroit kind of dead to rights for a lot of that, and to come away not winning that game is just another reminder that this Texans team has taken a step back. And I think even when Nico Collins comes back, there are some issues that you need to really worry about. And the Dolphins do have a their back feel. And in terms of like, there is a limit to that. Like I'm not rushing out and picking up a Miami Dolphins Super Bowl ticket or anything like that. But you look at the odds right now, they're plus 300 to make the playoffs the rest of the way. Let's take a look at the schedule, shall we? Gonna pull it up right here. Don't know why it went away so far. Now I have to click through a couple of things. But with Tua back, now let's for sure stop trying to make tackles, my boy. But with Tua back, this offense is at least running competently and should further on. Couple games against the Raiders and the Patriots. Then they go up against the Green Bay Packers. It's a Thursday night game at Lambeau. That one, probably not going to go great. Just going to put that out there now. That feels like a bad time for them. Then they come back on Sunday against the New York Jets. So more time to prepare for a bad football team feels like a dub. It gets a little bit difficult. You got at Texans, home Niners, but then at Browns, at Jets to close out the season. If they can get over the weather thing, because the Cleveland game and the Jets game is going to be tough, those are very winnable games at the end of the season. So if nothing else, they are going to be in the hunt bracket on the one side of the TV broadcasts. And I think this is going to be really, really interesting to see where this team goes the rest of the way. So that's what the story was from the NFL. What about the fantasy football world? Let's get ready for another week with the fantasy football waiver wire. It is time to get ready for another week in fantasy football. Let's look at the best options out there on the fantasy football waiver wire. Our streaming quarterbacks this week, we got two options. Russell Wilson, 23% owned. They're going up against the Baltimore Ravens defense. And I know division games in this division specifically tend to be a little bogged down. But that Ravens defense has given up numbers this year in the passing game. So I think Russell Wilson has the potential to have a real good week this week. If he's not available or you don't want to dance in the AFC North when it comes to streaming quarterbacks, can I interest you in a Drake May? Only 13% owned, going up against the Rams defense that's not super stout, and May's actually looked pretty good. So I think those are a couple of quarterback options that you can pick up on the waiver wire this week. At wide receiver, we got a couple. MVS, he is 1% owned. Now, not everyone is going to be Atlanta, but it's a pretty solid schedule for receivers the rest of the way for New Orleans and for MVS. When we look at this schedule now, it's not a murderer's row of defenses that they are facing. So they got the Rams, then it's at Giants next week, home Commanders. You can put up passing numbers on them. At Packers, I think we've established you can throw on them. Home against the Raiders, everyone can throw on them. And at Buccaneers, ditto. So this is a schedule now the rest of the way into the fantasy playoffs where it is going to feel yucky at times to trust MVS. And there's probably going to be a game in there that significantly hurts your chances with how he plays. But until that game comes, I think you have a lot of really good opportunities to take advantage of what's happening out now in New Orleans. Demario Douglas, 26% owned, 14 targets in the last 2 weeks. Again, they have the Rams this week. And again, Drake May is looking like an actual competent quarterback. At running back, it is Audric Estime, 4% owned, 45% snap share this week. He has completely taken that backfield over. It feels like, anyway. And listening to Chris Harris's podcast on Monday, this didn't feel like the plan. This was he's still going. He's just going to keep running here. Like, he was that good that he was kind of undeniable. And so I think he's going to get more opportunities there. At tight end, it is Jonnu Smith, 26% owned, facing Vegas. They haven't been able to stop a tight end in like 45 years. So this is a good matchup, I think. And again, as this offense gets a bit more competent, Tua becomes the rising tide that lifts up all ships. And on defense, the Houston Texans, 46% owned. They're facing Dallas. anyone who is facing Dallas is a streaming option. So look at them. And just because we want to look at under 35% owned, we're also going to give out New Orleans. Pretty good matchup for them again this week as well. So those are the fantasy football options for the upcoming week. What about the ones that frustrated us last week, though? It is now time to look at the fantasy football dumpster darlings. Time to go through our fantasy football dumpster darlings. We begin at the quarterback spot. For those of you who are new to this segment, the dumpster darlings, every week we go through and see the biggest performances from the least owned players to see just how frustrating this sport and this game can be when teams thrown together with absolute nobodies could put up gigantic numbers. So, Derek Carr, 12% owned, 20.46 fantasy points. Our wide receivers, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 1% owned, 24.4 fantasy points. He is the highest owned of our receivers this week because Tylan Wallace is an actual name of an NFL player who's apparently been in the league for 4 years. 0% owned, 19 fantasy points. That puts him at 23 fantasy points for the season. He had 115 receiving yards on Thursday Night Football, bringing his career total in 4 years to 213. The most out-of-nowhere fantasy performance maybe in the history of the sport. At running back, our running backs let us down this week. Troy Benson, 18% owned, 9.7 fantasy points. And Tyler Goodson, 2% owned, 7.9 fantasy points. Our tight end, Tanner Hudson, 0% owned, to the point where I wrote his name down, forgot to put what team he was on, and I have now forgotten that. 13.3 fantasy points. At flex, Alex Pierce, 15% owned, 16.1 fantasy points. Our kicker, Joshua Carty, 4% owned, 19 fantasy points. And our defense this week, the New England Patriots, owned by 9% of teams for some reason, 16 fantasy points. That puts the dumpster darlings this week to 145.86 fantasy points. All right, I know I said that we would have some baseball and some UFC. We're going to move that stuff to tomorrow now. So tomorrow's going to be a very UFC-heavy show, but we are running up against it time-wise here today. It's getting a little bit late. Want to get this out. Fantasy football thing with like 3 hours to go for the waiver wire, but want to get this out as quickly as possible. So MLB offseason predictions and UFC early storylines are going to come up on the show tomorrow, as will non-main event fighters to watch on UFC 309. And tomorrow, we will also get into NFL power rankings. That's going to be the thing for tomorrow, and a little bit more Grey Cup coverage as we get ready for the 111th Grey Cup coming up in Vancouver this week. Thank you all so much for sticking with me. Follow me on social media at Primetime Klein everywhere, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.